Welcome to another episode of In the Lab with Hoopsology. I am your host, Matt Thomas, joined by my best friend and co-host, Justin Goodrum. Justin, how you doing, man?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing good. Got a haircut last night, and it's always, I was kind of growing it out for a little while, and I had goosebumps down my neck early this morning, like getting ready for work and stuff. Like one of
Yeah.
those haircuts significant enough I could feel the breeze on my neck,
Oh, man.
which is a nice feeling in some ways. Not super early in the morning, but good to be able to see my ears again and everything. So
Right.
shout out to my wife for the haircut. Thank you very much. We have a bunch to get into today. As per usual, we have a lot of news leading into the All-Star break. We had another monster scoring performance that we'll cover. We had some controversial news, kind of a repeat news incident from last year and the last several years, unfortunately, for Joel Embiid right after his 70-point game. We have all-star starters that have been announced that I want to cover with you. We have NBA power rankings that have shifted up, and we have a new event, sort of a variation of an old event that will be a new first-time event in NBA All-Star Weekend. So a lot of great things to talk about. Before we get into it, just a reminder, thank you for all your support, and a reminder to please subscribe, like, share, really helps out the show. We've been seeing an increase in subscribers lately. Really appreciate that. You can follow us, Hoopsology, anywhere you're doing social media, certainly on YouTube. Look up Hoopsology or Hoopsology Podcast, social media handles at Hoopsology Pod. So, Justin, we had yet another 70-plus point scoring performance, this time by way of Luka Doncic. And I have to give, as much noise as he gets, maybe negative noise a lot of the time. Bill Simmons did say right after Joel Embiid scored his 70, he said Luka's going to be the next to do this, and it happened in less than a week. So I guess
good call.
Good luck, a turn of good luck for Bill Simmons there. So congratulations to you, sir. And friend of the show, one of the most likable personalities in all of basketball, Lee Ellis, was there in Atlanta when Luka dropped this 73. So I want you guys to hear what he had to say about this performance.
Luka Doncic's 73-point masterpiece is the wildest performance I've ever seen live. A real I was there moment and story to tell forever. With 41 points at the half, there was a buzz around the arena. He passed 50 with under 5 to go in the third. And while the Mavs led, most importantly, the game was close because spectator selfishness kicks in, and you worry if it becomes a blowout, Coach Kidd might rest him down the stretch. Luka had 65 with 10 minutes left, and it felt like Kobe's 81 was in play. And on every remaining Mavs possession, you wanted him to be the only one touching the ball. Play hero ball, in fact. We didn't care. But Luka remained focused on winning and even gave up a wide-open three to Dante Exum, who drilled it and effectively sealed the game. At that point, you hoped for a miracle Hawks comeback to force overtime for an extra 5 minutes, but it wasn't to be. Luka finished with 73 points and a win. There's no way of knowing beforehand when you're about to witness a moment like this, but it sure is cool when it happens.
Doncic, all right, so very cool. And just some more numbers with that performance. Luka went 25 for 33 from the field. So a very efficient way to go about dropping 73 points on the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks are a team that's kind of circling the drain and unfortunately have been all season long, really, in spite of a lot of people, myself included, thinking they would climb back up from where they were. So, maybe not the most impressive team to do this against, but, Kobe put up his 81 against the Toronto Raptors, which were a less than impressive team at the time. It's still an incredible spectacle. I think everyone would agree. Justin, did you catch any of this or have any thoughts about Luka's performance?
Heard about it and heard a lot of negatives, surprisingly, just because of other players this season scoring 70. I think there's what 4 players in 2024 have scored 70. So a lot of it's just like defense gone from the game, NBA
I
watered
think since
down.
2020, right?
I'm sorry.
Since
That's
like
20.
2020,
Oh,
right?
since 2020.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I stand corrected. So just it seems to be just kind of a lot of just hey, I don't think people understand how hard it is just to score like 30, okay, let alone 73. Just everything has to go right, the physical exertion. And you saw with the Hawks, I mean, that's not like, we're not talking about the Detroit Pistons. I mean, no disrespect. But I mean, to really pull off a feat like that is pretty incredible. And it's to see kind of just this criticism of just the league's going down the drain when the guy scored 73. I think that's a bit disheartening, and not really appreciating the greatness of Luka.
I'm glad you bring this up because you're right. This was, and not just because of Luka, but because of the combination of it
Yeah,
happening in the same week with Joel
agreed.
and then Luka. You did see this a lot, and I think two things can be true at once. Like, even though I would agree defense is less competitive than it used to be, offense has gotten more talented for one thing. But I think anytime you see a performance that's 25 out of 33, like I mentioned, I mean, that's incredible. That would be fairly remarkable for someone to do, with more wide open looks than what Luka was getting in that instance. So I think when comparing the two, I'm a little bit more impressed with Luka's even than Joel Embiid's. Although with Embiid, I think people are unanimously, oddly enough, in spite of these talking points we're mentioning on the negative side, people do seem to be unanimously impressed with Joel's scoring range, like that he can score on 3 different levels of the floor with relative ease. So there are some contradictions in all of this. I do think it's becoming less rare to see like a 50-point scoring game. Like that feels like less big of a deal than it used to be, back through the 90s and early 2000s. But I'm with you. I mean, I'm impressed anytime someone can get above 70 points. And it's not like the referees handed it to either of these gentlemen when they got their 70-point games last week.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And it just speaks to just what a superstar Luca is. I think if we're talking about just kind of marketability, I know he was on with the Inside the NBA guys. I think that was before. I think he was on there before. And they were asking him about there was a controversy with the fan and everything. So I think it's just also his resolve to overcome like a massive distraction and come out and just have this performance. I think that speaks a lot about him as well.
Yeah. So credit to Luka. Hats off to him. I do think he does have a real chance at challenging Kobe for that 81 at some point because of how much he gets the ball in the system that they run, for one thing, but also just how truly talented he is and how, if he's hitting from deep with efficiency, he should be dropping 40 in any given game, with the pace that we're playing at nowadays and just how he can take over like that.
No, agreed. Yeah.
So looking at, another person who we just were talking about, Joel Embiid, he was scheduled to play against the Denver Nuggets. You'll remember last year, of course, we had the MVP clash between Embiid and Jokic. We have, at this point, somewhat of a similar clash, although Joel, I think, is the clear front runner, as we just discussed last week, compared to a little more closeness with it last year competing with Jokic. Well, anyway, his opportunity comes up this season to play in Denver against the Nuggets. And what we're seeing reported is that the NBA is now expected to review the Sixers' decision to have Joel Embiid sit out against the Nuggets. And this is per Shams Charania. And Embiid, I didn't realize this until I saw this report come up, but Embiid didn't enter the injury report. This is a quote from Shams. I'm told until 15 minutes before tip-off. And for sure, that's something the league will have to look into, end quote there. So, Justin, is this, you know, just drama that's being kicked up? Are you disappointed in Embiid or other? I mean, how do you land on what you're seeing from this report?
I think disappointed less in Embiid, but kind of I don't know how I'm going to phrase this. I think in the situation, it's not that big of a deal. But if you look at the bigger picture, it is a big of a deal in terms of how many times he's played in Denver
Yeah.
and just the perception of him being afraid of Jokic. I mean, the optics don't look good for him. But in terms of this situation here, I think the more disappointing factor is the Sixers. I mean, it's 15 minutes before tip off. I mean, what are you doing? I mean, they're. I
Good
mean,
point.
what are the rules regarding this? You can't just all of a sudden just keep switch your starting lineup with 15 minutes remaining. I mean, I don't know. That's not fair. So to me, that's a bit concerning. I don't know what the league can really do about that. But in terms of NBA, I think because Jokic is not that. I mean, for fans like us who follow this every day, he's super popular. But to your casual fan, the Joker's not super popular. So I think the optics for Embiid, I don't think this hurts him in terms of like the broader sports landscape. But you get him in the basketball circles, yeah, I think this is a hit to his reputation for sure that he didn't play.
Yeah, it's. I feel mostly disappointed because it's a missed opportunity. What should be a marquee matchup. The last two MVPs and guys that were, rivals, even if it was contrived by the media for the most part, that's still something that you can market so easily and that fans do want to see. I do agree that, Denver being small market impacts some of that. But with Jokic being a multiple time MVP, I mean, the game kind of sells itself. That's easy for you to package and get people somewhat excited in, at least more excited than they normally are for a Denver Nuggets game. So it's a blown opportunity there. I do want to keep an eye on this and see if Embiid, or probably more accurately the Sixers organization, as you mentioned, gets fined for this. I'm not sure that they can justify, since it was 15 minutes before the game. I mean, if it was the same knee issue that had been hindering him on and off for a little while, for stretches at various times this season, I'm not sure you can really justify that 15 minutes before tip off. So it
Yeah,
does seem a little shady.
does. Very suspect for sure. And I know the Denver Nuggets fans, it was all over my Twitter timeline of them just booing Embiid, the chant.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all over him. So I mean,
A little more context to what you said in terms of the disappointment of Embiid not being there. He's 6-2 in his last 8 matchups against Jokic, but hasn't played in Denver since 2019.
wow.
So I think that really jumps out to people when they see that in the 2020s, Joel Embiid has never played Jokic in Denver. Now, granted, it is an East versus West matchup. So they don't play as much as like an interdivision rival or even
Sure.
the same conference type of rival. But still, that does seem a little egregious. It's been now 5 years that you haven't played in Denver. Another thing I saw that is interesting to keep an eye on too, Justin, and maybe Embiid just doesn't care about this, but it does seem like he cares. That was one of the things that was exciting, I think, about him winning MVP last year is he cared about it and he wanted it. He's now only 5 games away per the new stipulation on end of season awards. If he misses 5 more games, he's not going to be eligible for regular season awards.
Wow. I heard that too. Yeah. It's a factor.
So
Yeah.
cutting it very close.
Yeah.
A lot of people also, I think, have some outrage about the award because they're hearing this and they're seeing the dominating performances that Embiid is having. Personally, for me, though, my stance has not changed. I do like the encouragement of players playing 65 plus games in order to be eligible for these awards at the end of the year.
Yeah. No, me too. I think that should be factored into it. I think, we talk about the 90s and the 80s, just the longevity plays a part. And when you're setting, I think that skews the numbers there. So I agree with you. I mean, in terms of having just that higher threshold in terms of qualifying for the MVP race. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's important to have standards if you want things to be perceived as legitimate,
That's
and this
true.
is a standard that I certainly don't mind. It's an interesting debate, though, and history would tell us too that it's not common to win these postseason awards at even right at that threshold of, I believe it's 65 games.
Yeah.
So will be interesting to see what happens. Certainly, we wish Joel Embiid all the health to make it to the finish line and be eligible and in that conversation. Looking at both Jokic and Embiid, along with several other players, we had all-star starters announced at the very end of last week, and looking at what we have, just to shout them out for those of you who can't see the infographic here. On the West, we have SGA, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander from the OKC Thunder. We have Luka Doncic, who we just mentioned. We have LeBron James as the leading vote getter from the fans. I think the vote getter thing isn't a huge surprise, but we'll talk about LeBron in the starting role. KD, who has played great for the Suns this season in spite of maybe a little bit of a haphazard record. He is also starting. And then Nikola Jokic, two-time MVP, still doing great things in Denver. So there's our West. And while we're on it, let's just talk about the Western Conference before we move east. Any surprises that you see in the West starting lineup, surprises, injustices, whatever you want to describe it as, Justin?
I always feel weird about this. I think we talk about this every year. Guys get hurt, guys don't want to play, guys end up as all-stars. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you see a guy go into the Hall of Fame, do you ever hear about he's a 10-time all-star game starter? Do you ever hear that?
I do, yeah. I
You do.
think
Okay.
I think it contributes to the resume. I think people have kind of wised up a little bit and maybe realized that all NBA selections are a little bit more impactful than that.
Sure. But usually I hear just like he's a 10-time all-star. Like,
Mhm.
so, and I think talking about snubs, I would say I know we've kind of hated on him, but I think the Clippers deserve some love, and I
Mm,
think with Kawhi Leonard, I think he's been pretty solid. But to me, I
that's
don't
a good
know,
one. I like
like
that.
like starter bench is like tomato, man. I think I'm happy for like Shea Gilchrist. I think that's awesome
Yeah.
for him to be named starter. But I mean, it's kind of like these guys are all kind of interchangeable. They're all on the all-star team. I know some people just take it personal. He's not a starter, but I don't know. To me, it doesn't really make a difference. I know that's kind of maybe sacrilege. I think missing the team itself, it could be taken more seriously compared to if you're a starter or if you're on the bench. I don't think that really matters too much.
And we should have that information, I think, by the end of this week.
I
And
think
that
Thursday, right?
is,
Traditionally, TNT.
you're right. And
Yeah,
that's usually when you see the outrage really
yeah,
kind of ramp up.
sure.
I will mention just a couple things. And of course we have to preface that the all-star starters are based a lot on the fan vote. So that makes you eligible to be a starter. And depending on if you are guard or front court, that determines how you land here. So there's a lot of controversy over that whole process too, and like eliminating technically, the center position and all that. I don't want to get too much into that. A couple things I'll mention that are interesting to me, and I'm not saying really that are unjustified. For one thing, the Timberwolves are the number one team out west at the time of this recording anyway, though it's close with the Nuggets, and they have no representation here. I think if you look at their roster, like Anthony Edwards at this point isn't efficient enough to the point that I'd really want him to oust anyone on that list. So that's point one, is that it's kind of almost like San Antonio Spursy, when they wouldn't have a starter for a little while there, or maybe like tail end of Tim Duncan, even though Duncan would be an all-star, etc. but they would have like the number one team out west. So shades of that. The other thing, Pelicans, Zion not able to crack that starting lineup.
Good point. Yeah.
I think the other thing that's interesting, and I'll just go straight Lakers, if you are really like tuned in and watching the games and what's happening on a more detailed, maybe scrutinizing level, LeBron is not the best player on the Lakers this season. It's Anthony Davis, but obviously this is where the fan vote comes in. So I'm not saying I'm surprised that Anthony Davis didn't replace LeBron James here, but if we're talking about performance,
he's too popular.
The fans technically got it wrong, you could say, if you're basing on performance on the court. And I'm not even saying LeBron's having a bad year. Yes, everyone's given him his flowers for longevity and all that stuff. Yes, we, haven't seen a lot like LeBron James this season. But just, I think, interesting when you look at what's actually happening.
No, it's true. And also, I mean, LeBron's the face of the league, and he's having, he's playing at a high level. So it's just, that's tough to beat.
Yep. So moving east, let's take a look at our starters here. Damian Lillard makes it in as a starter. Remember, Justin, I'm sure you do, that there were several seasons where Damian Lillard couldn't crack the All-Star team.
That's right.
Good to see him in some ways. Good to see him as a starter right off the bat.
Right.
Tyrese Halliburton of Indiana, he's been putting up stats. So he really, I think in some ways, I'm kind of impressed by the fans in spite of the numbers that jump off the page. I mean, to put a pacer in the starting lineup, for one thing, but I think many would agree that he has earned that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Jason Tatum, I think controversial pick, along with Giannis and then Embiid to round out our starting five there. There's one player in particular that a lot of people are feeling were snubbed. You might mention him, Justin, but I want to throw it to you for your thoughts first on how this starting five is looking.
Again, I echo my comments earlier. I don't know if it's like a snub, but I think it's deserved to be called out. I mean, it's Jalen Brunson.
Yeah, that's exactly who I was alluding to.
Career best, 26 points, almost 4 rebounds, almost 7 assists. The New York Knicks really, remaining relevant in the playoff race. Yeah, a great season last season too. But I mean, I don't know. We're really arguing semantics here. I don't think it's something super egregious. And I mean, if he gets left off the All-Star team completely, then I think that's a massive mistake. And
I couldn't imagine that happening.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah,
I think he makes it. So if he's a starter, I don't know. I'm not opposed. I'm not like really pining to take any of the backcourt players off that list. So
yeah, I do think you're right. I mean, Brunson will get a lot of playing time in the All-Star game, no doubt.
Yeah.
I think it just shows that, he's, in spite of playing for the Knicks, oddly enough, I don't think he has a lot of name recognition around him.
He doesn't. That's true.
Which seems kind of weird. Like, I think a lot of people could not point out Jalen Brunson, like the difference between him and another player, like, if you said, is it Jalen Brunson or Tyrese Halliburton, or maybe that's a bad example, but a lot of people, even basketball fans, maybe could not identify that, which is just kind of odd because, point guard is such a big deal in New York. Like, they have that storied history of like great point guards coming from New York. And you have a guy who's serving, I mean, maybe he's not an all-time great, but he's having a great season. And, kind of feels, I mean, he wasn't able to crack the starting five in the All-Star game. And
no, it's a good point.
You'd think market alone, he would be challenging Tyrese Halliburton.
And a campaign
market
too.
Alone.
It's true. Yeah. No, you're right. It's a good observation. It's true.
And I don't know, I haven't seen too many of the player campaigns. I know the Rockets have been putting a little bit of effort into Şengün. Şengün also has, the love and support of another country. Sometimes that helps players out too. That he's getting a lot of support from Turkey, but I haven't seen too much campaigning as far as that goes.
Yeah, me either. But yeah, I think it's interesting. Um, yeah, the momentum wasn't on his side. Maybe with the snub, and maybe that'll fuel him, getting that surge next year. We'll see.
I do think another thing that is interesting also is that going back to the West, SGA replaces Steph Curry essentially
Hmm.
from this starting lineup, which I find fascinating because it's, again, Golden State might not be the biggest market, but it is still California versus OKC. Um, and so for Steph Curry to not get the votes required to oust SGA, I mean, I think that is correct. I have no problem, performance wise with that pick. I just find it kind of fascinating because for a while there, maybe Curry wasn't exactly the face of the league, but there were debates for several years there between LeBron and Curry being the face of the league at a time there when they were rivaling in the NBA finals together.
Yeah, no, that's true. And just he's so popular, and I think he won the fan vote. So I think he got more votes. I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
But I agree with you. I think with SGA, that's the right decision to make over Steph this year. Even though how much I love Steph, so.
Putting you on the spot, Justin, do you expect? I mentioned Şengün, who I do expect to maybe just barely crack the All-Star reserves. Do you expect any Bulls to be on the All-Star list when it comes out? I've heard buzz for DeRozan, a little bit of campaigning there. Do you expect to see it? Do you think it's warranted?
I think I would give it like a 40% chance just because they're the ninth seed. They've really bounced back, especially with Zach LaVine. That long period he was hurt. I would say there's a decent chance of him making it. But, the Bulls are kind of seen as also a team that's kind of less in purgatory right now. So I can kind of see it going both ways, but we'll see.
Absolutely. Yep. Definitely another great thing to keep an eye on. Want to mention also, in talking about the All-Star game and All-Star weekend, we have a first-time event for the NBA. And Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is not in lieu of a 3-point contest. This is going to be an additional 3-point contest.
I checked, correct. So you'll have the skills, 3 point slam dunk, and this will be another event added on top of that, correct?
And what this is the NBA versus the WNBA for the first time that we've ever seen it. It's going to be Steph Curry versus Sabrina Ionescu.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing a 3-point challenge. And we'll see how it goes. It's going to be really interesting. I think people who know of Sabrina Ionescu, which she certainly doesn't have the name recognition in spite of having her own signature shoe and the like. She doesn't have the popularity that Stephen Curry does, but she can knock down a jump shot. So I do think there is a real chance that she could take this and be very competitive with Steph Curry. Steph may need to watch out and bring his A game. What do you think of? I mean, this is the first time we've seen WNBA stuff thrown into the mix a little bit more, and this directly, certainly, I guess, is a better way to put it, because
Sure.
there's a presence on All-Star Weekend.
They've done integration before with the WNBA.
And there's like a little bit with like the shooting stars
Sure.
and things like that. But in terms of like head to head, this is the first time we've seen this outside of that shooting stars competition. What are your thoughts on this? Are you looking forward to it? What are you expecting from it?
I'm looking forward to the actual event. I'm not looking forward to social media of this, unfortunately. Just
Yeah,
in
that's
terms of
wanted to touch on that.
society, I just think this is going to get pretty ugly pretty quickly, no matter what happens. I mean, it can be I don't know, they're gonna have the greatest performances. Whoever wins against, I just see it being criticized no matter what, and used for political gain on either side of the aisle. Unfortunately, it sucks because we're basketball heads. We want to see the best just go out there and perform. But I think this is going to be used for sinister means, and I hope I'm
Mm,
wrong. If
mm.
if it come up, we come on here, the day after this, and we can really praise just basketball Twitter and just society as a whole, you know, celebrating this. Then I'll be totally willing to eat crow. But I don't think that's going to happen. This is based on our society today. So
Yeah, I think, and kind of to put it a little bit more bluntly, I think it's it's going to be interesting to see because there's a perception out there, and I'm not saying whether I agree with it or not, that Steph and Curry is kind of in a no-win situation. Like if if he loses, social media is going to go nuts. And I mentioned earlier, I mean, Sabrina Ionescu, very talented shooter,
yeah,
could legitimately
it's true.
win this. Um, and and that based on what I've seen and when she's done this type of contest before, she has the ability to knock Steph Curry out of this.
Totally.
It's just going to come down to who has the better performance, But with the way social media reacts, it's like if Steph Curry doesn't win this, he's going to get a lot of things, a lot of negative noise for that. I would say unfairly
So
so,
stupid.
and
Yeah.
I think also if he wins it too, I think he will get maybe some indirect negative noise of like, you know, taking it to her or whatever, like when she's a legit shooter. This is not like a physical competition between the two. This is a 3-point shootout. So I think I'm with you. I think we'll get a lot of dumb takes.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to it in terms of reading Twitter after this event is over. Looking forward to the actual event. I think it'll be really cool. Um, but yeah, just the way our society is, I think that they're not mature to handle this type of competition, unfortunately.
I'm fascinated to see how it will turn out. I also, because it's not like a physical direct, like they're not playing one on one or something like that. I I also think it may not be as much of a spectacle as is what's being built, simply because I think what'll happen is people will see that Sabrina can really shoot, and then it's just like kind of like another 3-point contest. And then maybe
Oh,
what you see down the road, maybe the positive thing, some would say, is that you have a mix of WNBA and NBA players in the 3-point contest.
well,
And I don't know
yeah,
whether you want to do that or like keep it separated between the leagues, like have a WNBA champ and an NBA champ. Might
yeah,
make sense to do that too, just for the sake of like just building a history in the leagues themselves. Um,
yeah.
but I think you're going to see that Sabrina can legitimately keep up with Steph Curry.
I agree, and but I think another thing too to keep in mind. But I mean, Steph's not just another. He's not a 3-point champion. He's not just a great shooter. I mean, you were talking about the arguably the greatest shooter who ever lived.
Right.
So
I think
I think
inarguably at this
inarguably,
point,
yeah,
but yeah,
exactly, yeah,
point
just
well taken.
being nice, and
Yeah.
But you're right. I agree with you. But so to me, it's just one of those things where you're gonna have a lot of I'm gonna sound bad. You have a lot of people that don't know about sports commenting about this and just thinking that they're the authority when they have no idea what they're talking about. And I'm not looking forward to that in terms of just your morning talk shows or late night talk shows, just trying to have a take on this.
Yeah,
Um,
a lot of clickbait, all that
yeah,
stuff. You'll see that for sure.
the event,
Yeah.
but I agree with you with Sabrina. I think it's with shooting. It's who has the hot hand. I mean, that's another thing
Right.
too. I mean, it's just like Steph could be killing it in practice and then, go cold when he's out there. Same thing for Sabrina. So, who's hot, who's cold. I mean, that's kind of where it's going to come down to. I don't know the rules of this. So that's another thing. It's another event. So in terms of like timing, I'm not sure how that's going to work. In terms of if this is going to be like 2 rounds, 3 rounds, if they're going to cut the actual 3-point contest short. To me, I would rather see actually Sabrina in the actual 3-point contest, in my opinion. Just to kind of see her against the rest of the field, as opposed to kind of like a one-on-one format situation. But that's just me. But I'm not opposed to this, but given my preference, I probably would rather have her just in the regular contest. But
Yeah. I do know I read that they have 4 rows of balls.
okay.
They can select where like a money ball row goes.
Mhm.
And then they have, that new like starry promotion gimmick. They have like 2, I guess, starry stickers out on the court.
Yeah.
That's a little bit longer that they have to shoot from. So I think that's the format. And I don't think, I don't think I'll be too surprised at the result either way, because
Me either.
Sabrina's going to be able to get all her shots up, and so is Steph, of course. So it seems like a pretty fair way to, if you're going to have, this kind of guy versus girl format, or NBA versus WNBA, however you want to word it. This is a very fair way to do that, where people can be the victor depending on just who's hot that night.
No, agreed.
All right, so one more thing to get to, Justin, and I just thought it was interesting. I'm not shy about admitting it if we're wrong, and based on what we've said, we're not wrong at this point. But I did happen to notice the power rankings. It's a good time to look at it because we're a little bit past the halfway point in the season. So I wanted to go over that and kind of discuss some other standings and interesting things too, and just get your thoughts on it. So here's the power rankings, the top 5 that we have right now as of yesterday at the time of this recording, January 29th. We have the Clippers have vaulted into the top spot in the power rankings. The Celtics are at number 2 and the Nuggets are at number 3. Both those teams, I looked it up, by the way, in their last 20 games, all 3 of those teams are 15-5,
Wow.
which is pretty impressive. The 76ers are in the 4th spot there. And I don't know if they just got extra love from Embiid going off or what the deal is, but the 76ers are only 11-9 in their last 20, which isn't, they are 3rd in the East still. They're holding on to that spot, but it's not nearly as impressive as the other groups there. And they've also dropped a few games in a row since this power ranking since before this power ranking was issued. So kind of found that a little bit interesting, but I think a lot of that is just how dominant Joel Embiid has been on the court. And then 5th, the Oklahoma City Thunder, which also very impressive, a 14-6 record over their last 20 games. When you look a little bit more closely, like a little more narrow lens, the Clippers are 8-2 in their last 10. The Thunder are 6-4 in their last 10. So that makes a little more sense for them having that lower distinction in the Western Conference. The Nuggets are 7-3 in their last 10. So you kind of can see maybe a better view at how that order came out. Celtics are 7-3 as well. And the 76ers, 6-4 in their last 10. So there are a couple other teams that caught my eye a little bit. The Pelicans have dropped out of the top 10. I believe they went from 8th to 12th. So in their last 10 games, they are 4-6, and they are falling in the standings. Granted, there's a little bit of closeness there between the Suns, the Mavericks, and the Pelicans, but the Pelicans now, the bottom 3 of those, sitting in 8th at the moment. Also found it interesting that the Knicks, who are on a tear, a 7-game win streak, they are now 8th. They took that 8th spot and finally cracked the top 10 in the power rankings, just on a tear ever since they got OG Anunoby.
Yeah.
And then the last team who finally, after I've talked about them all kinds on this show at the beginning of the year, the Cleveland Cavaliers finally jump into the top 10 in the power rankings, right at 10th. So Justin, I guess just to rewind a little bit, any thoughts about the Clippers taking that number 1 spot?
Yeah, what a turnaround for them. I think that's a really low key story. And it's weird because like people pick the Clippers. They're like the sexy pick every year. But
Yeah,
correct me
Zach
if I'm
Lowe
wrong.
last year. Yeah.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like they're not being talked about too much.
Yeah, it is kind of
uh,
quiet.
yeah, in terms of just the hype for them. So I think it's like a, we'll wait and see and we'll believe it when I see it. I'm in that mode. I think they're, props to them for overcoming just what happened with James Harden, and it's kind of figuring it out. But I think after the All Star break, we're kind of see if this team's like legit, and especially in the playoffs. I mean, really don't know how that's going to really work with all of them together, just based on their previous track record. So um, it's interesting to see just kind of some of the power teams really take hold in this top 10, like the Clippers. Celtics are pretty much a stalwart in that top 10. The Nuggets, 76ers, these are all teams. I mean, really the Thunder, that in the top 5. I mean, you take a look. Thunder, I think they're the top 10, really. The Thunder, Timberwolves, and then I think you get to kind of the Knicks, and I would say, the Cavaliers. I mean, those are teams that are traditionally not in the top 10 within the last few years. So
True.
overall, I'm interested to see where the Timberwolves go. I mean, are they going to be like the Orlando Magic, where it's just like we were praising them and then they kind of disappear? They have a pretty, great record now, but this is kind of uncharted territory for them, being at at the top of the conference for a lot of the season. So we'll kind of have to see what happens with them, because they took a pretty huge, significant drop. They're at number 7, considering their early season success. So
Yeah, going back to the Clippers, I mean, I have to hand it to this team for the maturity that they've had in working everyone in. I mean, it was a good sign early. I think when Westbrook, granted, it's also a good PR move as we discussed at the time, but him going to the bench to allow James Harden to come in and feel comfortable as the starter, not have this struggle for who's going to be holding on to the ball. I am truly impressed with how mature they have been in handling this, and that they're, at least as far as we're seeing, there really haven't been any blow-ups, like locker room blow-ups or things like that, or like late game situation type of blow-ups that you see on the sideline from time to time. You never expect that from Kawhi, certainly, but I was expecting there to be, I guess, a little more friction between Westbrook and Harden potentially, and we haven't seen that. You're right about the Celtics. They're like money at the top of the Eastern Conference. It's kind of feels like they're just in a circling pattern this regular season and just waiting to pounce on the playoffs. With team we talked about last week, with that major coaching change that happened, I think it's worth updating as well that Doc Rivers is officially in Milwaukee, and people are already jumping on him because he blew a double-digit lead. The Bucks did, that is, to the Denver Nuggets, and the Denver Nuggets came back and won that game.
hilarious.
I think, yeah. So, the joke being that Doc Rivers is in playoff form already. Har, har, har. But I do find it interesting, but there is no shame in dropping a game to the Nuggets at this point. And he hasn't really had time to build much of a framework there in Milwaukee. So I am curious to see how they adapt to him as coach, and how they correct some of the things that seemed like fatal flaws under Coach Griffin. So another team to keep an eye on as we move forward, of course.
No, totally agree. Yep.
So let us know if you guys are surprised about anything you saw in the power rankings. Let us know how you think that NBA versus WNBA 3-point contest will go, and maybe, some of the hot takes we might see from it. Just make your predictions in the comments. We love reading that stuff. Also, let us know if you were more impressed with Luka's 70-plus point game or Joel Embiid's 70-plus point game. And and we always enjoy reading the comments and getting your feedback. Thank you, as always, for supporting the show. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far with us, subscribe to us again on social media or any podcast platform or on YouTube. We got to get going. Call it a night. For Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. Thanks again, and peace out.
See you next time.